Good morning, everybody. My name is Michael Uslan, and I welcome you here today. You are the lucky ones. As I know from all of my years of coming to comic book conventions, and by the way, I was at the very first comic book convention ever held anywhere on the planet. I was in 7th grade, 1964, in a Fleabag hotel off the Bowery in New York City. There were 200 of us that showed up at that first Comic-Con. So things have changed a little bit over the years, but one thing that hasn't changed is when they open up the doors, everyone runs and checks out all of the booths first, and the panels tend to fill up a little bit later on in the day. But you are the lucky ones for having been here, because I will tell you right now that the future of comic books, and when I talk about the future, I'm not talking long term, I'm talking about like in the next minute, is all about digital. That's the future of comics. That is going to be the savings grace of the hobby, of the passion that we all hold so dear. That's how important what these gentlemen are about to tell you and to discuss with you is to all of us, including those old fogies like me who really love the tactile experience of holding something in print and collecting it and putting it up on my bookshelf. But the world is changing, and it's up to these gentlemen to tell us how it's changing, if it's changing for better, for worse, if it's going to help enhance and promote the collecting of comic books and the health of one of the most important creative forces that are out there today, comics and graphic novels. So I'd like to start today's panel by asking each member to introduce themselves and tell us just a little bit about them. Shall we start with David?
Hey everybody, I'm David Uslan. I am Vice President of Business Development for a company called Graphically, which is one of the worldwide leaders in digital comic book publishing and distribution, as well as being a producer, consultant, and all-around comic geek.
I'm Sean Forney. I'm a freelance illustrator and a self-publisher.
I'm David Beck. David Michael Beck, if you want the whole handle. I'm an illustrator, cover artist, sequential artist, all-around artist.
I'm Tom Zahler. I write and draw a comic called Love and Capes, a superhero romantic comedy.
And I'm Eric Adams. I'm the one-man show behind a comic book series called Lackluster World.
Well, gentlemen, I'm going to start this by asking you a two-part question. One is going to be, dead on, let's confront the topic right away. And the other one is more on creatively how this is all impacting you. Number one, are print comic books dead or dying? And number two, how is the digital technology affecting the body of your work, what you're doing, how you're doing it, and in the actual creation of your content? And we'll go right down the line.
All right. I don't think print's dead yet after seeing how much 52 sold, and whether you like it, don't like it, the numbers were pretty astounding from what I saw. As far as digital, I haven't changed up really how I've done anything as far as producing the book, but it has helped me get it out to a wider audience, and it's helped with the expense of trying to publish a book and get it out. I can actually put the book out first digital, build enough cash flow to actually go out and do a print run to take to conventions, and then still can sit there at a convention and say, hey, I've got the book here for X amount, and you can also go online when you get home, you can buy it for 99 cents or whatever. So that's my thoughts on it.
I think, well, obviously, print is not dead. It's going to be around for a while, but there is a strong move to the transition of digital comics, especially through all the major publishers at this time. I have mixed feelings about it, simply because I'm old school and I'm still working within the traditional methods and such, but I'm adapting simply because if you don't adapt, you don't move forward. I've been, I've got a Wacom pad and Wacom pad, whatever you want to call it. And what I've been doing recently is to do a finished illustration in the traditional techniques and then scanning it in and augmenting it with digital process. And I'm still not ready to get it out there because I've got to be competitive with the other guys that have been doing digital for quite a while. So I've got an open eye about this and an open ear about where it's going, because in my contacts within the industry, a lot of the traditional techniques, a lot of traditional artwork, which amounts to painted covers, are falling to the wayside in lieu of totally CGI colored artwork. Which, as I see in a lot of ways, the execution of the original artwork is becoming a little bit more minimal and letting the CGI work carry the weight of a lot of the artwork, especially in the sequential work. I think a lot of the companies, but editors, are a little bit biased towards that rather than going to painted covers because of the movement of the trend. So I'm kind of riding the fence there a little bit on this stuff.
No and yes. I don't think print's dead. I think that eventually it'll move to being a lot more like DVDs, where I watched every episode of Castle for free, but I still had to buy the DVD set at the end of the year. There are things that are just going to reproduce so much better, but I won't need to have everything in print, and especially when digital prices come down to the point that it's cheaper, so that if a certain comic book company does a 46-part miniseries about Power Rings, I don't feel like I have to spend $4 an issue. It'd be a lot easier if I could do it with a subscription, or if I could, read it in a cheaper format and then decide if that's something that I need to keep and display as a trophy on my bookshelf. As far as production, I was doing a lot of stuff digitally. I've started pulling back from that a little bit so that I have original artwork to sell. And right now I'm still working with both the limitations of both formats, where I'm trying to keep it so it displays well on an iPad, but things like page turns, which you have to be conscious of. If you have a big reveal in your book, you need it to be on an even numbered page, because if you put it on the odd numbered page, when somebody turns the page, they're going to see the reveal before the page before, because it's just the natural way that you read. And you won't have to worry about that if you're doing a straight digital comic book, because you can only display the one page at a time. I also try to avoid things like double page spreads, because they don't display as well on an iPad, because you have to turn it or zoom in, and anything to make the experience more work for you, I'm trying to avoid. I want to make it as simple as possible.
So the question is print dead? Definitely not. I wouldn't even necessarily say it's dying. I'd say it's waning. I think that just like music, people still buy vinyl records. There's still those hardcore collectors that want that material. Now, obviously, they're still selling a lot more CDs than vinyls and a lot more MP3s than CDs. But I think that that's the model comics is going towards, where we're still going to see print, but the books that people buy won't so much be the thing, because people aren't going to buy their entertainment. They're not going to drop $20 or $30 on that big book. They're probably going to read the book digitally, either free or for a price. And after the fact, they're going to buy that book as a trophy to put on their shelf and be able to show their friends to associate themselves with it. And I think that it may take some time before we get there, but I definitely see the future being, substantially digital, kind of a print supplement to the digital.
From the graphically standpoint, personally, I don't ever want to see print die, because I am first and foremost a collector, and I love going in the store every Wednesday and buying my books, and buying each of your books on this panel and artwork, and collecting it and storing it and categorizing it and doing all that great stuff. I'll never stop doing that. But from graphically standpoint, what's interesting about digitally distributing books is that you can hit new eyes and you can hit new fans and you can target new audiences, and that's what we're interested in. I'm watching these kids up in the front row play their games and play their mobile devices, and we want you guys to be reading your comics online. And if I can take a comic book and if I can put a game with it, like a casual game, or if I could put a motion comic with it, or if I can link in merchandise so you can see all sorts of cool merchandise, or if I can bring in all these great social media tools and allow you to talk with these creators in the actual comic books and actually converse with other fans, on those different digital devices, it's cool. And that's how you get new fans into the space. And in the comic book world where, fans are dying off and kind of us core geeks are shrinking every day, we can do some things to spice up that content and make it more appealing to new eyes. And that's what we're interested in. The fact that I could take one of your books and put it on some devices and get people in Saudi Arabia and China and Japan and South Africa and Antarctica to read your book, that's pretty awesome. And it's just literally taking the word of mouth, which has been what this industry has been based off of since day one. I like Superman, I tell you that, you go buy Superman and you tell him, and so on and so forth. Just bringing that to the digital space. And maybe right now you're not seeing huge revenue, you're not seeing massive money, but this is the way to get more fans into the space and bring content to people's attention and get people like in Hollywood interested in it, and that's what we find so appealing.
David, can you talk a little bit more about the difference between reading a comic book and this new digital comic book reading experience? Some of the extras, some of the things people can see in terms of artwork or scripts, or specifically how they could interact with creators?
Well, the short, quick spiel is that in the digital space, you can read a comic book in a comic book format. Depending on what service you read and what that reader looks like, some are better than others. So I understand, Thomas, what you're talking about with looking at a full page spread online. But what I like about the digital space is that to a new creator, they don't have to think about the traditional panel setting that a typical comic book would have. If they are, amazing artists and want to think out of the box and do really crazy panels, not in a kind of a square format, but just do great artwork, we can cut that artwork in very interesting ways. We can create our own cool new panels. We can create a new viewing experience of that content so it doesn't have to stick to that traditional format. And by giving creators that option, it's a pretty cool, thing to keep in mind when you're putting together a book. So you can display stuff in the current state, you can display stuff in really cool, innovative ways. So it's kind of that out-of-the-box thinking that we like. From our company's standpoint is we'd like a creator to tell us the way he would want to see his book being distributed, however that is, and we can make that happen. And that's what I find awesome. We're a tool for the creator, for the publisher to use, and we can adapt our technology to make it work however they want to see it work. And I really like that idea.
All right, now for the people who actually create and make these books, whether it's digital we're talking about or publishing, would you rather be with a mainstream publisher? What are the advantages of that? Would you rather be with an independent publisher? What are the advantages of that? Digitally, does that free you up from all publishers? Does it hurt you or help you in terms of the marketing of your books? So I'd like to get kind of your feelings about that. And also, while we're on the subject, I know with a lot of directors, they can't stand the fact that their works are appearing on DVD or on TV, or somebody's watching some big movie they did for a big feature film screen, that somebody's watching it on their telephone. So creatively, I'd also like to know your reaction to your work in comics being seen on different types of devices. So that's a lot.
I don't even know where to start. As far as it being seen on other devices, I don't know, I've seen some pretty cool stuff that's been done on like iPad and iPhone and whatnot that I find really intriguing, that I want to learn how to do and figure out how can I make my book look like that. Where there's I've seen some guys do it was something with 3D where everything kind of like pulled off the page, like it was actually three-dimensional without having to use 3D goggles or anything like that, and you could actually manipulate the page itself by like twisting and turning the iPad. And I think something like that, like moving forward, trying to do something digital would be cool to be able to achieve something like that. And I kind of don't really remember all the rest of the questions in that string.
Mainstream versus independent in terms of publishers.
I don't know, I'm torn. I think a lot of people still associate, because a lot of people are still interested in in print they associate, you know, the mainstream like Marvel, DC, or Image, Dark Horse. They associate that big name with being, okay, I'm going to read this stuff. And when you start getting into more independent stuff, a lot of people still have like a stigma against independent work, or you know, they think that independent work might only be, you know, somebody photocopied something in their basement to make a comic book. So I'm kind of torn as to whether or not that helps, hurts, or whatever. And as far as digital goes, personally, I sell a lot more books digitally than I do actually sitting at a convention for, you know, 2-3 days at a time. And sitting there being an independent publisher, most people do have that look and feel of, I've never heard of this guy, or I don't know that publisher, so I'm gonna skip over and go find, you know, the regular dealers that have the stack of Marvel, DC books. So in a way, being digital and being independent helps. I don't have any extra expenses as far as, oh, I've now got to split my profits with, you know, the publisher and the editor and so on and so forth. And I think you mentioned also as far as like presenting it to like a Hollywood type person or something like that. I think I've had a little bit better experience being able to have myself digital, whether it's like at San Diego this year, I had a couple producers that were interested in my book. I was able to say, hey, you can take home a copy of my book, and also here's a DVD that has the book on it, and you can go to Graphically, Drive-Thru Comics, and so on and so forth, and actually, you know, you can check out the book there as well. So it does help in many respects as far as getting out to a wider audience and making it readily available for, you know, being anywhere. I could, you know, be in, say, Walmart, and somebody, you know, would happen to recognize me and say, oh, I want to see your new book. I can pop out my Android phone and go, here's the book. You know, you can actually go read it online. You can go to my website and find all the links to where you can pick it up.
In my recent conversations with people and observations, I think that publishing in general is behind the curve in following the advancement of technology, and I think that's why, whether you're it's an independent publisher or a mainstream publisher, children's book publishing or whatever, the technology is way ahead of it, and everybody's trying to, there is in transition. They're trying to find how best their products are going to suit to these different formats. I had a conversation with Jim Steranko over drinks last night after dinner, and he said that what he saw was a problem where you're taking a format of comic books, which is you know, a book, and you're trying to adapt it to a format of digital digital presentation. In his mind, it has not yet made it, because you're trying to adapt one thing to another. I understand what he's saying, but also after talking, hearing David, your company is looking for different methods of avoiding that by going straight to the source of the format, whether it be iPhone, whether it be a Kindle, or you know. And I think a lot of the publishers right now are scratching their heads. They're behind the curve. They're trying to follow where that technology is going to take their product, and at the same time they're fighting the battle of trying to find the next big hit. These guys, they have stockholders that want dividends, and so they keep going back to the same thing and trying to rehash it, and yet trying to purport it in a new technology, and it's not really seamless. If you have movies transition very well to these formats because it's a movie. A book, like Jeff had just mentioned, where you open up a book, you've got a 2-page action spread, and there's nothing like that in the world. You know, you can't get that on a Kindle, you can't get that on an iPhone or whatever the other device is. So I think that whether you go independents tend to be more adventurous. I think they don't have a lot of bean counters and stockholders and lawyers telling them where the safe zone is. I think they're more interested in trying to find out a direct process to marketing their books, whereas the bigger companies, even though they won't say this, I think they're more of a following situation, and they're also being proactive as well. But I think the independents have a little less of a, everything's risky, but the risk factor, the corporate risk that's involved is less for an independent because it's, he's independent, as opposed to a big public publishing company that has to pay salaries, and they have the overhead, and they have much more of a demand for a sure thing transition to those formats than the independents do.
And creatively, are you cool with people reading your work on handheld devices?
I think creatively, I think from a business standpoint, creatively, if you can get your work out there in any way, shape, and form, I don't care if it's a banner being towed by a biplane. You got to get it out there because the competition is so steep. But this technology is changing, every 4 minutes, and staying ahead of that curve is impossible for anybody. Okay. When you're talking to an old school guy like me, I'm thinking, well, Jesus, how am I going to get my stuff out there when everybody's loved me for the last 40 years, and now my stuff, is it becoming irrelevant into the new marketplace? I don't think so, because everybody still likes painted work. Everybody still likes, highly illustrated work. Well, I don't care if it's in prose books with plate illustration in it, or whether it's sequential work, whether it's a children's book, a young adult reader's book. People love illustrated imagery, okay? And it's never going to go away. The problem is with all this technology and all the publishers trying to follow the curve, because they are nowhere near, even in the middle of it right now, just where this is going to go. And it's a scary time, especially in a down economy.
I'll reverse the order of the questions because I'm difficult, because you said exactly what I wanted to say about where the comics go. I create it. You can read it however you want. I don't care how you're doing that as long as you're reading it. I'm not going to get involved in that part of your life. Do whatever you want as long as you're paying me for it. I'm fine. As far as independent over mainstream publisher, the tortured artist in me would love to say independent. Because you're a lot more flexible. Like David said, your overhead is a lot less. I have to cover my house payment. Time Warner has to cover their building. But honestly, mainstream is where I want to be. I did Love and Capes independently, and then I took it to IDW. IDW has been an incredible company to work for. They've never asked to change anything that wasn't a spelling error, and I'm all for changing the spelling errors. And the number of stores that carried me, the number of places that thought I then became a real boy, just increased more and more. And it gave me a sense, it validated the book to the general public in a way that being an independent wasn't able to do. Now, I think there's a way around some of that stuff. You guys have all heard of Dr. Horrible, right? Love Dr. Horrible. Felicia Day, when she was a very cute redheaded person who no one had heard of, did The Guild. And then Joss Whedon saw The Guild and did Dr. Horrible. And it's great to say that as an independent, I can get my product out digitally and get it into iTunes, and then no one will ever see it because it'll be buried so far down at the bottom of the list that it'll be a cute YouTube video that somebody might have heard of. But when Joss Whedon sees the process the trail that somebody else has blazed, and then can go, hey, I'm going to do Dr. Horrible, and then that becomes featured on the front page of iTunes, and everybody's aware of it, and he's a large enough name that he can, because he's made his bones mainstream that everyone knows about, he can go independent and then bring people along with him and blaze that trail. So I see a lot of problems with curation in digital, where if everybody's equal, there's so much noise that it's hard to find the stuff that you really want to find. Right now, publishers are able to do that where they're working out deals with places, or just from the volume of their material, that they're being placed high enough where people will notice them. Until there's another system to replace that, I think that mainstream is still kind of the way to go to get yourself noticed and set up. If you can bring them something that you've proven, when I did Love and Capes, nobody was saying that the world needed a superhero romantic comedy. And if I had done it with DC characters or Marvel characters, nobody would have liked it, because it would have been telling. It's like Cloverfield. Cloverfield is the world's best Godzilla film that doesn't feature Godzilla, and you love it because it doesn't feature Godzilla, but if it was a Godzilla film, you'd be upset you never saw the monster. So the same way, I can take the archetype characters and I can do something different with them, and people will like it, but if I did with the mainstream characters, it wouldn't work. Once I did the book and proved it could work, I could take it to IDW and say, all right, now let's have you publish this book because you see that I have this fan base and these are the awards I'm receiving and these are the reviews I'm getting. But as an independent, I could prove that it was possible to be done, but I had to take it to a mainstream publisher to take it up to the next level. And at least that's the way it is right now.
Mainstream versus independent publisher. I'm kind of a control freak, so I self-publish. And I'm perfectly okay with the idea of working with a publisher someday. But, and I've asked myself that question a lot. What does a publisher offer me, mainstream or independent, that I can't do on my own? And I think that I can do the same things they can do. They can probably do them a little better. And they have more, I guess, resources to do those things. They're going to distribute my book. They're going to edit my book. And they're going to promote it. And of course, I can do those things myself. But with the more hours you can put into a project, the more hands it's going to get into. So in the end, that's what I see a publisher as. They are, their job is to get your work into as many people's hands as possible. And with digital comics and digital distribution, it removes 1/3 of that. You can do that yourself, no problem. You don't really need a publisher to do that. Now, to promote your book digitally, that might be something to consider. But to say mainstream versus independent, to me, they're kind of the same. I feel like, of course, whoever has the further reach or has the audience that I think my book would speak to the most is the one I'd be more interested in. Now, as for my work being on a device, and I guess, if it's a little iPhone or whatever, I think it's ridiculous that a creator should want to even try to dictate how somebody would view the book. That's up to the reader. If the reader wanted to see a book bigger, they wouldn't have an iPhone, they'd have an iPad or look at it on a computer screen. And I don't feel like that my books require, they're visual, of course, but I don't think it's required that they have to experience the visual in that way. As long as the concept and the ideas behind the book are carried over, I'm happy with that, because I think that in the end, even with films, you don't, the film, you kind of build the film in your head even when you're watching. There's so much of it is personal that I think that carries over regardless of how it's distributed.
I think distribution is the word that we're talking about. I mean, creativity is open. Everybody wants an expansive, creative outlet, whether you're making it or whether you're, purchasing it. But the crux of this is distribution. How do you get it out there in all these varied formats that everyone's going to absorb? Whether it be print, whether it be, that's the key thing about this whole thing is distribution. I know a lot of independents. They just kick ass on their products, but how are they going to get it out there? They don't have diamond. They don't have distribution like the big companies do. And yet the big companies don't have that freedom built in, this fearless independence because of corporate risk.
And to your point, one of the things that I've tried to do since I switched to IDW is I still treat myself like an independent publisher. So there's no one as invested in me succeeding as me, except perhaps my mom. And so I treat IDW like my printer, not my publisher. And I've told them that in the best possible way, where I'll set up the interviews, I'll promote the book, I will do everything I can as if it was still just my book. I'll run it all by them to make sure I don't step on any toes, but I will promote the book like it's still an independent book. But the advantage I have is that if a comic shop orders it, they're going to be able to get it, because I know that was a problem with Diamond when I was self-publishing. So those kind of channels are set up for IDW to be able to get the book out in a way that I couldn't do, but I will promote it like it's still the only thing that I do.
Terrific. A question for the audience. I'd like to see by a show of hands how many people here have ever read a comic book on a computer? How many have ever read a comic book on an iPad? And how many have ever read a comic book on a handheld device like an iPhone or something similar? Well,
How many read comic books?
there you go. Excellent. I want to ask one more question of the panel before I turn it over to Q&A for you folks. And my question has to do with motion comics. David, I'd like you to explain to everybody who might not know what motion comics are. And the question is, have you ever been involved in them creatively? What your feelings might be toward them creatively? Is this a new hybrid medium somewhere between comic books and animation and cartoons? Or is this a supplement to comic book creating. I really want to get your feelings about that, David.
Well, I think, the bigger question there is, are creators open to adapting their content to different technology, to different platforms that can entice people to view it? Motion comics are one way of doing that. In my experience, motion comics are great for non-traditional comic fans. Most comic fans, and most creators, at least the hardcore guys, maybe, might not like to see their material get futzed with and turned into animation. I don't know how many of you guys saw like the Watchmen motion comics when the movie came out, or the Astonishing X-Men motion comics that came out. They look really cool. To kids, it's like seeing a really cool animated, almost like an animated cartoon, and kids like that. I just think that whatever somebody can do to get their content out there and distribute it in a unique way, then I'm all for it. The numbers, though, that you can generate from motion comics are pretty astounding. And just one example for you guys, I worked on a motion comic based off of an image graphic novel called Red Warrior. And Red Warrior was a great book that came out a handful of years ago by a great creator named Jeff Amano. And the book sold about 7,000 copies. That's it, through Image. And we took that book and turned it into a 12-chapter motion comic. Each chapter was about a minute long, and distributed it across a wide variety of digital platforms. And as of last month, we are now approaching about 7.5 million views of that content. So when you take a book that sold 7,000 copies and you twist it and turn it around a little bit and adapt it to add in some animation, and all of a sudden you got 7 million plus people around the world that have seen it, it's pretty awesome.
What did you charge for the digital comic?
Actually, so in the motion comic space, there are really two ways of doing it. Number one is you could charge for it, which is what like DC and Marvel and some of the mainstream guys do. Ours is completely advertising supported.
Okay.
So we distributed it for free and pulled in advertising and brands to come in and pay us to involve those brands and incorporate them. So we distributed it for free, made some money off.
Multiplier too.
Did you get a
Yeah.
backlash on the free thing when they finally had to pay for it?
No, they actually never, it's still free right now. So you can go to places like conflicts.net, you can go to a number of places and it's still free. The brands have been very happy, obviously, with the numbers that we've generated. And plus, you could take a book like that and when you adapt it to film or television and get in front of talent or a studio and you're like, hey, yeah, this book sold 7,000 copies, but here are the 7 million unique views and all of their information. Then to a studio or a talent, they're like, oh, Jesus. They're like, well, here's our audience right here. That's pretty that's pretty awesome. So I really like the space when it works, when it's necessary.
And before I turn it over to the guys, question, David, in doing that, do you promote the creator as well and leave open an avenue for them to then see or purchase that creator's other works and follow that creator?
That's a hard question. I would, I promote the creator whenever I possibly can. I mean, it's all about the creator for me. But in the motion comic space, in kind of this animation world, when you're leaving the comic book realm a little bit, it's the material that I think speaks more than the creator behind it, unless you're a huge name that can draw in a fan base, whether you're a Stan Lee or a Neil Adams or a Frank Miller. So in that space, it's really, I think, the content that's more important, because it's that content that's going to attract that kid to come in and actually view it. If they see, hot ninja chicks jumping around, that's pretty interesting and somebody will come in and see it. But if they see, other content that maybe is more adult but by a big name, that kid won't know and wouldn't come in and purchase it or read it.
Great. Now, I'd love to hear the creator's response and what you guys feel.
I like the motion comics, as David mentioned, as using as like a marketing advertising material. We actually did that 2 years ago, the first time I did San Diego. I wanted to do something sitting in small press that was going to stand out apart from most of my competition that was sitting around me. And so I actually went to Richard, who's doing all the video and sound for us, and actually asked him to make some motion comic-like material to have playing on a DVD player on our table. because we're sitting there with several hundred, if not 1,000 people that are also trying to sell a small press comic book that we've got to compete against. And for the most part, everybody in here is they go after visual material, and if they're not familiar with the material, how do you draw them in to say, hey, come check out my book, and that was our big thing to use as a bit of marketing to get people to come over, was have that playing. And a lot of people would come over before they checked out our banners and our backdrops and things like that. It was, oh, what's playing on the DVD player? And it really drew in a lot of different people that might not ordinarily have came over to the table to see what we had, because it was something that caught their eye, because there was there was motion and something moving on a table that normally does not happen when you're walking through a comic book convention or walking through small press at a convention. And outside of that, it's like you guys were talking about selling it and things like that. I haven't approached it that way yet, but I have. Basically, if somebody comes up and buys one of the copies of the comic book, I usually hand out a DVD that has that material on it, and there's other material on there, like some music and things like that we made. It was just like a bit of extra material you get, kind of like the extras on a DVD when you go out and spend the $20-$30 for all those 4 hours extra footage or whatever. This, something nice that they could go home and read the book and go, okay, I don't have the next issue yet. Let's see what's on here and see what else I can do to keep people interested in it.
Again, I'm Mr. In-Between. I am a huge fan of animation. I've seen some changes in the 40 years that I've been illustrating professionally. If the analogy that comes to mind to me was, I came up in a world where it was all illustrated animation, and then along came The Incredibles and Toy Story, which became highly digital, three-dimensional formed illustration techniques. And in hearing David's comments, I think that animated comics, I think it's going to be the next thing, because I can see the same kind of transition from illustrated, traditionally illustrated work going into animation, which everybody seems to right now envision as a three-dimensional type of application, hence Toy Story and The Incredibles and such, which is amazingly impactful. I just absolutely am bowled over by that stuff. It's kind of like the same thing that happened even before that in the advertising age, where you'd have storyboards, and storyboards were done panel to panel for a 30-second commercial, and then all of a sudden stop animation came in, where they would animate an arm, Neil Adams Continuity Studios got into that. I remember seeing an Ipana toothpaste commercial, and it just, it had this animated thing, and all it was just a couple of things, arms or whatever, where, Superman was talking to a kid, and he handed him a panel or a tube of Ipana toothpaste. These corporate guys had never seen anything like that. It was almost like the first PowerPoint stuff that ever happened. I can see that happening, but here's the other side of it. I know people who have kids who have grown up in this digital format for animation, hence the three-dimensional stuff. And then when you show them a cartoon like The Mermaid or any of the conventional illustrated in the classical sense, the kids are looking at that in a new way, because for all these years they've been seeing the three-dimensional stuff. So all of a sudden, whoa, I like that because it's so different from the stuff that they grew up with. So I think there's room for both of it. I think it has to do with personal taste. I think a lot of people will end up liking both. Again, it's still too vague to put a finger on which is going to take the place of another, because I really don't think it will. But you cannot question the force of animation in many applications, especially in comics, because I think it's just going to broaden.
I'm agnostic about motion comics. Mostly at this point, I think they're like 3D movies. where James Cameron can take a movie with an admittedly really boring plot and kind of make it sing because he's making a 3D movie that's designed to be a 3D movie. Meanwhile, Green Lantern, which was also kind of a boring plot, didn't hold up well in 3D because they were just adding that onto something that existed. So if you got the right property for it, I have no problems with it. In my case in particular, I'm writing a comic about people talking, which doesn't lend itself to a lot of animation, so I'm not dragged on from at least mine. I don't, much the same way as I said about how people read it, if somebody wants to turn it into a motion comic and I don't have to do any work whatsoever, I'm all for that. To David's point though, I think that he makes a point about one of the great things about digital is how great the distribution is. And the thing I like about having comics on the iPad is that we've lost the spinner racks and the 7-Elevens and the convenience as a way to get people into comics. Sadly, it's the same marketing plan as drug dealers, but you hook them young and you hook them often, and then they buy the books at the bigger stores and start buying the trade paperbacks. But if you're selling them through an iPad or distributing them through an iPad for free, suddenly every kid on their lap has a comic book store. And I know just because people talk about how comics don't resonate with this generation a little too much, I think. I know what my sales figures are in Love and Capes, but I know that I move 15 to 25 times more product on Free Comic Book Day when it's given away. And I've done books for the Cleveland Indians and a couple other baseball stadiums, and we can move 40,000 units per day on that by giving it out. And everybody reads it, because if you get a comic book, you're going to check it out, especially if it's written for you. There's a lot of comics that are out there that aren't written for an 8 to 15 year demographic, and I think that's some of what comics has missed, where they're not trying to hook the younger people in, and they're putting walls up where I love the Batman Brave and the Bold cartoon with a fiery passion, and my goddaughter loves it, and when we talk about it, I can't give her another comic book. Whereas when I was growing up, Green Lantern would appear in Superman, and then I could pick up Green Lantern, and it was the same universe, and it was the same reading level. It was a gateway into more stuff. Whereas if she's reading the Brave and the Bold comic, I'm like, well, you certainly can't read Detective Comics. You're not old enough yet. So I'd like to see them winnow those barriers down a little bit. But that's, like I said, the strength in digital, I think, is being able to get more people places where they can find comics and buy them, or buy the advertising, or get the advertising supported ones, and get them hooked in that way.
I think motion comics are pretty cool. There's comics and there's animation, and the space between is motion comics. And I don't think that's this defined spot. I think it's kind of a spectrum of things, because I think a lot of motion comics are kind of mislabeled, should probably be called audio comics. And I like the idea that you can kind of choose how much involvement you want the reader to have, like active entertainment versus passive entertainment, where they have to force themselves, not to say that, they've got to be forced to read it, but they have to push themselves to be engaged into the book that they're going to read, or they can just turn on the TV and then watch something and let it be entertainment just fall into them. And I like the idea that I prefer people to have more ambition about their entertainment and jump into it and have some personal involvement, because I feel like they'll get more from it in the end. But again, to the point I made earlier, I think it's really up to them and what they want to experience and how they want to experience it. And I think it'd be awesome if someday there was some kind of tool digitally that you create this motion comic, but you're able to kind of choose the spectrum as to how much there is to it, where you can say, well, I want the audio, or I don't want the audio, or I want this much motion or that much motion. Maybe it's even like a little slider where you can really ramp up how much active versus passive entertainment you're looking at. That might be thinking a little abstractly. But I think that'd be
You're
really
thinking
cool.
on another format there for us.
So I'm a big fan of animation too, and I think that motion comics are a pretty affordable way for people who aren't necessarily interested to jump into your book to take a chance on this somewhat animated piece of your book. And I think anything that gets your story in more readers' hands, or entertainment experiencers' hands, the better.
Well, we have time for one, maybe two questions in the audience. You've been given really an education. This has been so thought-provoking with such a great amount of information. Let's see if we get these two questions in.
Thank you. This is a question for David. I want to know if there is an industry standard both across independent and the publishers to try to track and rate how the digital comic is growing? Is there like a measurement that they're using? And so why is it?
It's very much the wild, wild west in terms of tracking numbers. Each of the companies are very, very private as to each of the distribution companies and the publishers are very private with those numbers. For the most part, digital numbers aren't where some of the bigger publishers thought it would be as of now, and that's because they, like people have mentioned on this panel, are about 10 steps behind some of the newer companies, some of the newer talent. They don't understand that they have to tweak and change that material, make it more appealing, that they're just distributing that static comic book content digitally, which means that they're catering to that core fan base, but that fan base would rather buy the comic book in its physical form than in the digital form. But each of the companies tracks those numbers individually and independently. Like with Graphically, with our 275 plus worldwide publishers from Marvel on down to the 4,000 independent creators that we work with, we track those numbers. We know where everything is going. We track the numbers behind each of our individual platforms, so we know where that's going. Like right now, the two biggest growing digital platforms for comic book material are Android and the Nook, actually. iPad and iPhone, the Apple gadgets have kind of not flatlined, but it's just a little bit less. It's a little bit less than it has been. Android's exploding, and the Nook, and soon the Kindle will follow. But those are great tools to read your books because you can do very, very cool stuff with that, like geo-syncing content. So like if you take a comic book and you walk into a movie theater or walk into a specific location, it will unlock bonus content and special exclusive content for you. There's all sorts of nifty stuff that you could do with those platforms that you can't do with the other ones yet. But everybody's tracking it, and it's continually, obviously, in an upward trend. But some of the gadgets, some of those devices are doing much better than other ones.
Yes.
My question is for the creators. I grew up, my books actually introduced me to content that wasn't in movies or on television, that had just, it broadened my horizons as literature has as well. And in my lifetime, I've also seen movies progress into wonderful array of digital possibilities. Going back to you're verbal driven. You have words. Yes. You have words in your comic, and it doesn't lend itself to emotion. My fear is, I also grew up with movies. If you look back, and they're technically challenged, I guess you'd say, but they had great content, great story. And I'll just say, Raiders of the Lost Ark versus the new Indiana Jones film. It kind of illustrated, you might be able to do something in a film. That doesn't mean you should.
I can actually give you a better example.
Okay.
Godzilla.
All right, yeah.
Where I watched a guy in a giant rubber suit and loved it, and I got a CGI one, and I thought it was 2 hours of my life. I'm going to ask for it back.
So, with the motion comics and with the transition to the digital, my worry, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on these, are you worried about that content that lured us all in and held us for so long on our favorite characters and favorite series? Are you worried about losing that content to just kind of grab the quick edit, the motion, and that?
No.
Okay.
And I'm not, because I think content always tends to win out. You're always going to have people, like with 3D movies. You've got everybody doing a 3D movie version of their stuff now, and it doesn't have to be 3D. But it's Captain America. It didn't matter if it was 3D or not. That was awesome. And I think that eventually that stuff wins out. We remember some of the flashy stuff that tries to be flashy. When 3D movies first came out, I mean, I can probably name the first couple. There's one of the Creature from the Black Lagoon films. There was Gorilla at Large, and the spectacle got people interested. And then once some of those technical aspects are figured out, then you get people who, when they have the time to think about it, can really figure out how to make it work. Cameron, like I said, is a great example of it. The 3D technology he used, Cameron always breaks new ground. But a lot of that stuff had existed before, but he was the first one to actually use that in a storytelling point of view. And I see, for as much as I think we look at things with a filter and say, oh my God, this was so much better when I was a kid or when I was younger, and it seems to not be as good now. But there's a book called Everything That's Bad for You is Good, something like that. And they reviewed St. Elsewhere versus House or ER. And it's amazing just how much more complicated the storytelling's been. I won't remember it verbatim, but the St. Elsewhere one was basically, he has something called diabetes, and then House is like, his serotonin levels are crashing right now, we need to pump him full of insulin. And it's amazing how much more complicated and how much better the stories are able to be told because you're building on the backs of people who started. So the people who do it initially, some of them go for the flash, some of them don't have the technical capabilities to do, but that gives you something to stand on to get better. So I think with some of our technology, we're getting to a point where it's a lot of people taking advantage of the medium, and it hasn't shaken out yet.
We're getting the blinking light, so let me tell you, scheduling-wise, and I'll put in an unabashed plug, at 12 o'clock in this room, I'll be speaking about my journey bringing the dark and serious Batman movies to the silver screen, and about my life's work doing that. My autobiography was published this past week. It's called The Boy Who Loved Batman, and I'll be talking about that. If anyone would like to get a copy of this, they're for sale at booth 52, and starting at about 2:15 today, I'll be personally autographing copies for anyone, or if you just want to come by and chat, I'll be over there. At 1 o'clock here, we're going to have a great panel on Captain America. And if you're a fan of Captain America from any generation, I think you're going to really enjoy that panel as well. I'd like to thank these gentlemen for what truly, for me, has been one of the most thought-provoking and informative panels I have ever witnessed at a convention. Thank you guys very, very much.
And one last thing for all of the kids in the room, and by kids, I consider that 21 years and younger, as well as the people who ask questions. Right next to the camera there's a pile of Graphically t-shirts, so you guys can run up there and grab a t-shirt and enjoy it. Thank you guys for coming.
Thanks. Hope I'll see you at noon.